The blizzard descended on Dead Crow's Hollow with the fury of a vindictive spirit. Though Eva Sedlachkova knew better than to believe in such things. She believed in iron and leverage, in the mathematics of pulleys and the physics of wind resistance. She believed in what her hands could build and her mind could calculate. But as the storm swallowed the landscape in a suffocating white void, erasing every landmark she'd memorized during her 3-day trek, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since leaving Bohemia: terror. Not the sharp, clean terror of immediate danger, but the slow, grinding fear that whispered she'd made a catastrophic mistake. That crossing an ocean to escape her brother's contempt, that refusing Harlan Pike's script wages, that testing her wind-driven sled in November when any sensible person would wait for spring, all of it had been pride masquerading as courage. And pride, her father used to say, while bent over his clockwork, was the engineer's fatal flaw. The wind tore the breath from her lungs before she could draw it back. Ice crusted her wool coat until it hung on her shoulders like chainmail. Her boots, quality leather she'd saved 3 months to afford, were blocks of frozen agony. The sled, her beautiful doomed prototype with its cogged belt system and braking fins, lay somewhere behind her, its bolts sheared clean by a gust that had sent the whole contraption careening off the trail. Before abandoning it, Eva had examined the failure point with an engineer's instinct for understanding disaster. She'd found the sheared bolts in the snow, turning them over in her numb fingers, cataloging the damage. The threading had been filed down, she'd noticed not worn naturally, but deliberately weakened. At the time, standing in the gathering storm, she'd assumed it was a manufacturing defect, perhaps cost-cutting by whoever supplied Pike's operation. But as she'd tilted one bolt to catch the fading light, she'd spotted something else, a faint impression on the bolt head like a stamp or mark left by whatever vice had held it during filing. The mark was irregular, almost like a letter, but the storm's urgency had pulled her attention away before she could examine it properly. She'd pocketed 2 of the bolts without thinking, an engineer's habit of keeping evidence of failure for later analysis, and fled into the blizzard. Now, hours later, she leaned into the gale, each step a negotiation between her will and the storm's. Through the white chaos, she caught glimpses of Dead Crow's Hollow skeletal timber frames rattling like Bones' tin roofs, clattering their death throes. The mining camp had been abandoned 2 winters prior, when the ore ran thin and the company moved on, leaving behind the corpses of ambition. 3 structures still stood. Eva staggered toward the squat general store with boarded windows, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. She slammed against the storefront wall, splinters biting through her glove, and threw her shoulder against the warped door. It resisted until she braced her boot against the threshold. Leverage, Eva always leverage, and heaved with everything left in her body. The door shrieked inward, spilling her into darkness. The smell hit her first, mildew old tobacco and something metallic that made her stomach clench. Blood, fresh and sharp beneath the rot. The wind slammed the door shut behind her, plunging the interior into near total darkness. Eva fumbled for her tin of matches, her fingers clumsy with cold. The first match flared, casting trembling shadows across overturned shelves, scattered tins and debris, and a body. He lay on his side near the back wall, partially obscured by a fallen shelf. Eva's breath caught. She took 2 steps forward, the match burning down, and saw him clearly, a man Lakota, by the intricate beadwork on his torn buckskin shirt and the thick braid draped over his shoulder. Late 20s, with a broad-shouldered frame that spoke of strength even in collapse. Blood darkened his thigh, where a jagged tear revealed torn flesh. His ribs bore the mottled purple-black of fresh bruising, not random marks, but the deliberate pattern left by a rifle butt swung hard and repeatedly. Iron shackles encircled his ankles. The chains had been severed, but the cuffs still locked tight metal, biting into raw skin. The match died. Eva struck another, her hands steadier now despite her hammering heart, and moved closer. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths that rattled wetly. Alive. Barely. A war club lay near his outstretched hand, its stone head nicked and bloodied. Recent prisoner transport, Eva realized. Someone had been hauling him somewhere, and something had gone catastrophically wrong. Eva found a buffalo hide among the abandoned goods and spread it over him, then coaxed a fire to life in the potbelly stove. Only when warmth began to fill the space did she turn her attention to his wounds. She soaked a rag in melted snow, heated over the stove, and knelt beside him, carefully peeling back the buffalo hide. The bruising was worse up close, deep, angry marks that suggested cracked ribs beneath. She pressed the warm rag to the blood on his side. The blanket stirred. Eva's hand froze. The man's eyes slitted open, dark, sharp, predatory in the firelight. His gaze swept over her in rapid assessment, and the rag in her hand, the lack of weapons, the genuine concern in her expression. His chest heaved with a ragged breath, and his lips parted. He whispered something in Lakota, soft and unfocused. His hand twitched toward the war club, then fell back as his strength failed. His eyes held hers for another heartbeat before the hardness softened. He saw no threat in her. Eva exhaled slowly. "Easy," she murmured. "You are hurt badly. I am not here to harm you. I help. You understand help." His eyes drifted closed again, but his breathing steadied fractionally. Outside, the blizzard shrieked, and somewhere in the darkness, wolves began to keen a rising, falling chorus that made Eva's skin prickle. She glanced at the door, still wedged shut but flimsy. If the wolves decided to test it, she'd need to brace it properly. And if men came, whoever had shackled this man and beaten him, she'd need a plan. Eva looked back at the man beneath the blanket. His chest rose and fell, fragile and stubborn all at once. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story beyond the shackles and the blood. But in that moment, as the fire crackled and the storm raged, she understood with absolute clarity that their survival depended on each other. Eva Sedlachkova folded the bloodied rag and began planning their next move, the pocketed bolts from her sled pressing against her leg through the coat fabric, evidence of one disaster that would in time help her understand another. Eva had been born in Bohemia 28 years prior, in a narrow house that smelled perpetually of brass filings and machine oil. Her father, Tomasz Sedlacek, had been a clockmaker whose hands could coax precision from metal. Eva had inherited his gift for mechanics and his stubborn refusal to accept limitations, a combination that had charmed him and infuriated her mother. When Tomasz died 3 years after Eva built her first working automaton, his workshop went to her eldest brother. Eva received nothing but her mother's jewelry and a curt suggestion to marry and stop embarrassing the family. Instead, she'd sold every piece booked passage to America, with a carpetbag full of smuggled tools, and left without saying goodbye. She'd worked her way west, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Omaha, taking jobs in machine shops where foremen would hire her if she proved herself. She'd learned to ignore the comments, the groping hands, the casual dismissals. She'd learned to charge half what men charged and deliver twice the quality. 3 months ago in Pine Bluff, mine owner Harlan Pike had hired her to improve his ore hauling system. Eva had proposed a wind-driven sled, a wheeled chassis with a sail rig, and cogged belt system that could harness gusts to assist downhill runs paired with braking fins. Pike had advanced her materials and promised wages in silver coin. She'd delivered the prototype 2 weeks ahead of schedule. It had worked beautifully on the first 3 test runs. On the 4th, Pike had appeared with his foreman Deke Foster and informed her that her wages would be paid in company script paper vouchers redeemable only at his overpriced store rather than the agreed coin. Eva had protested. Pike had smiled thinly and said, "Miss Sedlachkova, your temperament makes you unsuitable for continued employment. He'd kept the sled. Eva had spent her last dollars building a second prototype with scavenged materials. She'd been testing it when the blizzard struck 3 days ago. The sled had performed beautifully until a sudden gust snapped the support bolts she'd bought from Pike's supply depot. They'd been substandard, she'd realized too late. Filed thin. Now feeding the fire and watching the man beneath the buffalo hide, Eva retrieved those pocketed bolts from her coat. She held them close to the firelight, examining them properly for the first time. The filing was crude but systematic, designed to weaken the metal without being obvious. And on each bolt head, pressed into the metal by whatever vice had held them during sabotage, was that faint mark she'd noticed before. In better light, she could see it more clearly, not a manufacturing stamp, but an ownership mark. Irregular hand-struck, it looked almost like a letter. A P, perhaps, she frowned, turning the bolt. Pike marked his property. She'd seen his stamp on tools and materials during her employment. But why would his mark be on bolts that had failed her sled? A low groan interrupted her thoughts. The man was stirring his head, turning toward the fire. Eva set the bolts aside and moved to his side, pressing her hand gently to his shoulder. "Slow," she said softly. "You are hurt. Ribs broken, maybe. Leg cut deep." His eyes opened fully this time, dark and alert despite the pain. He studied her face with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how she must look, filthy, haggard hair, escaping its braid in wild tangles. But his expression wasn't judgmental. It was assessing, trying to understand. He spoke in Lakota, careful and deliberate. Eva shook her head helplessly. "I do not understand. I am sorry. Do you speak English?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. When he spoke, his voice was rough, each word carefully shaped. "Some. Little." Relief flooded through Eva. "Good. That is good. My name is Eva. Eva." She pointed to herself. He watched her, then lifted his hand and pressed it to his chest. "Nashoba. Nashoba." Eva repeated, testing the name. "You are hurt, Nashoba. I will help. Understand, help." He nodded, but his gaze shifted to the shackles still locked around his ankles. His jaw tightened. He said something in Lakota, sharp and bitter, then switched to halting English. "They say I break thing. Rail. Not true. They blame you for something you did not do?" Eva said slowly. "Sabotage, yes." He spat the word. "Sabotage. They blame. Put iron." He rattled the shackles. "Take me. Jail. But not me." Eva's mind raced. Sabotage. Railroad sabotage. She'd heard rumors in Pine Bluff about a culvert collapse on the main line, a blast that had derailed a handcar. The talk had been full of anger about hostile Indians disrupting progress. But if Nashoba had been arrested for it, and the arrest was false. "Who did it?" Eva asked. "Who really broke the rail?" Nashoba's expression turned grim. "Not know. But they want me gone. Lakota gone. Take land. Easy if we bad." Eva's stomach churned. It fit. Pike's railroad expansion, the land seizures, the convenient arrest. If someone wanted federal funds and seized land framing indigenous people, was a time-tested strategy. "The shackles," Eva said, pointing. "I can remove them. I have tools." Using a heated nail and pliers, she worked the crude locks until both cuffs fell away. Nashoba flexed his ankles, wincing as circulation returned. "Thank you," he said clearly, his gaze meeting hers with something between gratitude and tentative trust. Eva reached into her coat and withdrew her last strip of jerky. She tore it in half, offering him one piece. Nashoba hesitated, understanding she was giving him half of what little she had then accepted with a nod. They chewed in silence. Outside, the wind howled a long rising wail that ended in a sharp crack. Then came another sound, the high keening cry of wolves, closer now. Ava's head snapped toward the door. Neshoba's hand closed on the war club. "Wolves," Ava said, pointing. "Danger." Neshoba tried to push himself upright, but pain lanced through his ribs, and he gasped, falling back. Ava caught his shoulder. "No, you rest. I fix door." She dragged debris toward the door to brace it, a broken shelf, a crate of rusted nails, a length of chain. As she worked, she felt Neshoba's eyes tracking her movements. When she glanced back, he was sitting up despite the pain club across his lap, posture protective. "Window," he said, pointing to where one board had come loose. Ava grabbed the board and nails, using a rock to pound them into place. As she turned back, her hand brushed Neshoba's shoulder, unintentional, the briefest contact. But it was enough to make them both pause. Neither spoke. The moment stretched fragile. Then the door rattled violently. Ava grabbed her pliers. Neshoba tightened his grip on the club. They waited as claws scraped wood, a low growl vibrating through the walls. Neshoba gestured toward the stove. Ava grabbed a burning stick and thrust it toward the door's base. Smoke billowed through the gap. The scratching stopped, replaced by a frustrated snarl and retreating pause. Ava lowered the stick, her chest heaving. She looked at Neshoba, and he looked back. In that exchange, she saw the same grim calculation: 2 injured people, limited supplies, a storm predators circling. Their survival depended on cooperation, on trust. Neshoba nodded once. Ava nodded back. They settled into watch, taking turns feeding the fire. As night deepened, Ava found herself studying Neshoba and the way he held himself despite pain, the intelligence in his eyes, the careful precision of his movements. "Ava," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Why you?" Here alone, Ava considered the question. Something about his direct gaze made her want to offer more than a simple answer. "I build things," she said slowly, gesturing. "Machines, tools. I build sled wagon for wind." She mimed a sail catching wind. "Man here, Pike, he hire me. Then he cheat. No pay. Take my work." Neshoba's jaw tightened. "Pike. You know him." "No name. Bad man. Take land. Hurt people." He paused, searching for words. "Railroad, his. He owns part of it, yes. Mining too." Neshoba nodded slowly, pieces fitting together. "He want land? Lakota land? We say no. Then, boom." He made an explosion gesture. "Rail break. They say, we do it. Lie. And arrest you." Eva finished. "Yes." They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, understanding rather than wariness. Outside, the storm battered the walls while wolves circled. But inside, 2 strangers were becoming allies. And in Dead Crow's Hollow, that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. Dawn never came. The blizzard swallowed any hope of sunrise, leaving Dead Crow's Hollow suspended in gray, howling twilight. Eva dozed by the stove, jerking awake at every creak. Neshoba drifted in and out of fevered sleep, his breathing labored but steady. She was letting the last jerky crumbs dissolve on her tongue when she heard it, a bell. Faint at first, almost lost in the wind, a rhythmic clang, clang, clang of metal striking metal. Not random, not natural, man-made. Ava's head snapped up. She moved to the window and peered through a crack. Through the swirling white shapes emerged a handcar on a rail spur, pumped by 2 men in heavy coats, with 3 more riding behind. Lanterns swung from the frame, casting sickly yellow light. As they drew closer, Ava made out details that made her stomach drop: a Marshall's Star rifles, and a tall man in a foreman's hat. She recognized Deke Foster, Pike's foreman. Ava turned. Neshoba was already awake, propped on one elbow, his face drawn, but his eyes alert. He'd heard the bell. He knew. Eva moved quickly, snuffing the lantern. The store plunged into deeper shadow. She crouched beside Neshoba and pointed toward a shelf near the back wall that had toppled, forming a partial barrier. He understood. Gritting his teeth, he began dragging himself across the floor using his arms. Eva grabbed the buffalo hide and followed, helping ease him behind the shelf. She positioned herself in front of him instinctively, her body shielding his. Their faces were inches apart in the dimness. His breath, warm and ragged, mingled with hers. His gaze held hers for a long moment, questioning, trusting. She felt an odd flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Neshoba nodded once. Eva nodded back. The handcar bell clanged closer. Boots crunched through snow, voices carried through the wind. Drag marks lead this way. See them right to the storefront. That was Foster's gravelly bark. Store looks intact. Could be holed up inside. Another voice clipped and authoritative. The marshal. Or dead already. Bastard was bleeding heavy when he ran. A third man, casual, as if discussing livestock. We check anyway. Pike wants proof. Dead or alive, he wants that Indian accounted for and delivered. Foster again satisfied cruelty in his tone. Eva's jaw tightened. Pike. Of course. The footsteps reached the door. Someone tested the handle, then shoved. The debris Eva had braced held firm. A boot slammed into the door once, twice, 3 times. Locked tight, or blocked. Wait. Smoke's coming from the pipe. Someone lit the stove. Silence. Eva's heart hammered. She cursed herself for not dousing it, but without warmth, Neshoba would have frozen. Could be scavengers, drifters. Or him. And maybe that Czech woman Pike fired. She went missing same time. Could be conspiracy. Foster's voice turned sharp. You two circle around back. Marshal, cover the front. I'll flush them out. Footsteps scattered. Eva's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped. If the posse forced entry, it was over. She looked at the stove. The fire had burned to coals, but broken wood waited nearby. An idea formed, reckless, desperate, but possible. Eva moved fast, crawling to avoid being seen. She grabbed the nearest crate and tilted it, spilling dry wood into the stove. The coals caught immediately. She shoved more wood in, too much, choking the airflow. Smoke billowed out thick and acrid, flooding the store. Outside, Foster hammered the door. Open up or we burn you out. Eva grabbed a tin of kerosene and splashed it onto debris, then struck a match and tossed it. Fire roared, spewing black smoke that rolled toward the ceiling and poured through cracks. Fire! The whole place is going up. To hell with it, back off before the roof caves. Eva heard their retreat boots scrambling through snow. She pressed a rag over her mouth and crawled back to Neshoba, covering his face with the hide. He coughed violently, but stayed flat and silent. The smoke cleared slowly. Eva risked a glance through the window and saw the posse regrouping near the handcar, arguing. Foster gestured angrily. The marshal shook his head. They'll wait us out. Eva whispered hoarsely. Wait for the storm to clear, then come back. Neshoba shifted his hand, finding hers in the dimness. He squeezed once, reassurance or solidarity. When she looked at him, she saw the same grim determination she felt. They had hours, maybe less. Hours to find a way out, or hours to prepare to die. Eva pulled the buffalo hide tighter and began planning their escape. The storm broke at dawn. The wind eased to a bitter whisper, and the sky lightened from black to iron gray. Eva watched through the window as the posse stirred near the handcar, checking rifles. Foster spoke to the marshal, gesturing toward the store. The marshal nodded, raised his rifle, and sighted down the barrel. The shot cracked across the hollow, punching through the wall 2 feet above Eva's head. Plaster exploded. She dropped flat, tasting grit. A second shot followed lower, splintering a board. Warning shots, Eva muttered, crawling to Neshoba. Next ones will not miss. He was sitting up, leaning against the shelf. His face was pale sweat on his forehead despite the cold, but his eyes were focused. He'd torn another strip from his shirt and wrapped his thigh, securing it with a practiced knot. "Cannot run," he said in halting English. "Leg, too slow." Eva shook her head. "Then I make you fast." She'd worked it out during the night. Her sled chassis was buried under snow 300 yards south. If she could retrieve it, she could fashion a travois to haul him. "I have device," she explained, gesturing. "Frame, strong, to pull you, fast. We go to trees." She pointed west toward the pine line. "Hide forest, then north to shelter. Doctor?" Another shot punched through the door. Neshoba nodded, decision made. "You. Careful," he said, his dark eyes holding hers with intensity. "They shoot. Use small target, but I will be fast," Eva promised. She checked her pockets, matches, knife pliers, wire, medical supplies. She pulled her hat low and moved to the back door, easing it open. The cold hit her like a blow. Snow was knee-deep. Eva waded through it, angling toward the bunkhouse while keeping the store between herself and the posse. Shots echoed warning fire. She dropped to her belly and crawled the last 50 feet. The sled's chassis lay half-buried. Eva dug frantically until she freed the cogged belt and axle assembly. She tied rope to the front and began dragging it back. A shout went up. A guard had spotted her. "There, woman's making a run." A rifle cracked. Snow exploded a yard to her left. She flattened, gasping. Another shot closer. From the store, Neshoba appeared at the back door. He held the frame with one hand and hurled his war club in a high arc. It fell short, but the motion drew their fire. Bullets kicked up snow around him. He ducked back inside. Eva seized the distraction. She scrambled upright, grabbed the rope, and ran. Shots peppered the ground behind her. She dove through the doorway, and Neshoba slammed it shut as bullets thudded into wood. They didn't speak. Eva dragged the chassis inside and began stripping away the sail, leaving the frame and axle. Using rope and leather straps, she rigged a crude travois. Neshoba levered himself onto it without protest. Eva looped the rope around her shoulders and waist. She tested a pull. The travois moved. She kicked open the back door. The ascent began. The gorge west of Dead Crow's Hollow was brutal switchback trails carved into frozen slope, littered with loose shale and ice-slicked rock. Eva leaned into the rope until it bit through her coat into her shoulders. Behind them, the posse scrambled to follow shots, wild but close enough to keep her nerves screaming. A bullet ricocheted off a boulder, inches from her head, and the whine sharp and vicious. She threw herself sideways, nearly overturning the travois. Neshoba grabbed the frame and held it steady. Their eyes locked hers wide with adrenaline, his dark with grim focus, and she nodded before resuming. Her thighs burned, her shoulders screamed, her lungs felt scraped raw. But she didn't stop. Halfway up, the snow shelf gave way without warning. Eva felt the ground dissolve beneath her boots and lunged forward, clawing for the rock face. Her fingers caught a ridge, her legs kicked empty air. The travois slid backward, dragging her toward the edge. Neshoba's hand shot out. He hooked her elbow with a grip that sent pain lancing through his ribs. She saw his face contort, but he didn't let go. He hauled her sideways, pinning her against the slope with his body weight, his breath hot and ragged against her ear. For a heartbeat, they were motionless, pressed together on the crumbling edge. His chest heaved against her back. His hand remained clamped on her arm, fingers digging in as if afraid she'd vanish. She could feel his heart hammering, could smell blood and sweat and fear. Ava's mind screamed at her to move. But for that suspended moment, all she could process was the solid warmth of him against her. The absolute trust required to let him hold her life in his grip while his own body balanced on the edge of collapse. She'd never depended on anyone like this, never let herself. The vulnerability was terrifying, and somehow right. "Go!" he rasped in English, his voice raw with pain and effort. "Go, not leave you." Eva sucked in air that tasted of ice and copper, her own blood from where she'd bitten her lip. She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat, and braced her boots on solid ground. Neshoba released her slowly, reluctantly, and she grabbed the rope again and pulled with renewed desperation. They reached the timber as the sun broke through clouds. The posse's shouts faded behind them, lost in thick forest. Eva didn't stop until the trees swallowed them completely. Then she collapsed against a pine, her chest heaving, her muscles screaming, her entire body trembling. Neshoba sat slumped on the travois, his face ashen, lips tinged blue. Blood had soaked through the bandage on his thigh. But his eyes remained alert, tracking the forest, listening for pursuit. Eva forced herself upright. "West," she whispered hoarsely. "Cabin. Dr. Rowe, help." Neshoba nodded once. Eva looped the rope again and began dragging him through the pines, following a frozen creek that led deeper into wilderness. Her shoulders were raw where the rope had abraded skin. Her wounded arm from the earlier graze throbbed with each movement. But she focused on the rhythm, pull step, breath in, breath out. Survive. Behind them, the forest stood silent and watchful, keeping its secrets. Beside her, Neshoba's labored breathing was both a burden and a comfort. She wasn't alone. Neither was he. They'd survive this together, or they wouldn't survive at all. The line cabin appeared at dusk, materializing from deepening shadows, a low structure of chinked logs with a stone chimney and shuttered windows. A weathered sign above the door read, "Dr. E. Rowe, Frontier Physician, Supplies Within. Aid freely given." Eva sagged with relief so profound it made her knees weak. She pushed the door open and dragged the travois inside. The interior was sparse, but functional. A cot, a stove with wood stacked beside it, a table covered with journals, and shelves lined with medical supplies that made her heart lift. Neshoba slid from the travois with a grunt. Eva helped him toward the cot, then set about building a fire, coaxing flame from wet kindling through sheer will. Only when warmth filled the space did she turn to his wounds. The thigh cut was worse than she'd thought. The stitches had torn completely, leaving the wound raw and weeping. If infection set in deep, he'd lose the leg. Eva washed her hands with alcohol and threaded a needle. She'd stitched leather 1,000 times, but flesh was different. The stakes were infinitely higher. She cleaned the wound with alcohol-soaked cloth. Neshoba's breath hissed through his teeth, his jaw clenching hard enough that she could see the muscle jump. But he didn't flinch. His muscles tensed beneath her hands, iron hard with restraint. Eva worked methodically, closing the tear with small, even stitches. Neshoba watched her face with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every breath. When her fingers accidentally grazed the uninjured skin of his inner thigh, just a brush as she repositioned his breath, paused for a heartbeat before resuming. Neither spoke. The fire crackled. Outside wind whispered through pines. When Eva tied off the final stitch, her hands were trembling. Neshoba reached out and covered her hand with his briefly calloused fingers, rough and warm, a gesture of gratitude and something deeper neither had words for. Then he withdrew, expression carefully neutral. Eva turned away, her face warm despite lingering cold. She busied herself searching for food and found a blessed cache, dried beans, salt pork cornmeal, even coffee beans. While beans boiled, she examined Rose's journals. Most were medical notes, but one entry dated 3 weeks prior caught her attention. November 18th, 1875. Treated frostbitten child Lakota, age 7, brought by M. Kincaid from Roundup Camp. Toes blackened, amputation avoided. Child's family reports tents burned by railroad men during forced removal. Mother states guards set fires, deliberately laughed, while families fled into cold. Kincaid confirms witnessed burning personally. Notified territorial authorities. No response. In the margin, angry pressure had nearly torn the paper. Railroad men fired tents. Children nearly died. Pike's orders. Ava's stomach churned. This wasn't land acquisition. This was attempted murder. Burning families out in early winter when temperatures could kill within hours. She showed Neshoba the entry. He read slowly, and when he looked up, his eyes were hard with fury that matched her own. "My people," he said softly, each word deliberate. "My cousin's daughter, 7 winters old. She lived, but close, very close." His hand clenched. "They burn, tents, we run, cold, so cold. Then they say, we bad. We break rail, lie, all lie. Pike wants land." Eva said, her voice tight. "The railroad wants the route. If your people are there, they create a problem. So they make you the enemy, justify removal, and when someone destroys railroad property, blame us, easy." Neshoba finished bitterly. A sound from the corner made them both turn. A woman was stirring, thin, mid-30s with graying hair, pinned tight and sharp eyes. She pushed herself upright, slowly wincing. "You found the journal," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Good. You need to know what you're fighting." "Who are you?" Eva asked. "Mary Kincaid, school teacher. I taught Lakota children until the railroad forced the closure. Pike bought the land, burned the building." Her voice was bitter. "I've been watching Keene and Pike since they arrested Neshoba. The timing was too convenient. I knew something was wrong." From her coat, she pulled a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a surveyor's tool, a folding rule with a metal file edge, and a handful of iron bolts, their threads stripped and filed. "I found these near the culvert blast site 2 days ago," Mary explained. "I've been investigating since the arrest. And this," she tapped the tool, "belongs to Deke Foster. I've seen him use it dozens of times. Look at the file edge. See that nick distinctive?" Eva took the bolts and examined them closely. The filing was crude but systematic, designed to weaken without being obvious. She compared the marks to the nick on Foster's tool. They matched. The pattern was unmistakable. Then Eva's breath caught. She pulled the bolts from her own sled out of her coat pocket, the ones she'd recovered after her crash. She held them beside Mary's bolts in the firelight. The filing pattern was identical. The same crude technique. The same distinctive skip where the nick caught metal. They filed my sled bolts too. Eva breathed realization cascading through her mind. To sabotage my work, to discredit me, maybe to cause an accident. She tilted both sets of bolts toward the light, examining the bolt heads closely. And there it was. On both sets, the culvert bolts and her sled bolts, faint impressions pressed into the metal by whatever vice had held them during filing. Not manufacturing stamps, but ownership marks. The letter P. Pike's personal stamp. She'd seen it dozens of times during her employment on tools, materials, equipment. His mark of ownership. Pike did this himself, Eva said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. Not just ordered it, did it personally. His mark is on both sets of bolts. He sabotaged my sled to humiliate me, to drive me out. Then he used the same technique on the culvert to cause the collapse and blame Neshoba. Mary's face hardened. Then we need more than evidence. We need witnesses. Multiple voices Pike can't silence. A shot cracked through the window, shattering glass. All three dove for cover. Outside, horses whinnied. Boots crunched snow. "Found them!" a voice shouted. The siege had begun. Bullets punched through the cabin's log walls. Eva pressed flat, her heart slamming. Neshoba crawled toward the shattered window, war club in hand. Mary grabbed the surveyor's tool and bolts, stuffing them back into her satchel. "Root cellar," Mary hissed, pointing toward a trap door beneath the cot. "Leads to an old mine cut. Exit 100 yards north." Eva hauled the cot aside, yanked the trap door open, and gestured for Neshoba. He dropped through, landing hard but staying upright. Mary followed. Eva grabbed Rose's journals, and medical kit evidence was too valuable to leave, tossed them down, and descended, pulling the trapdoor shut as Boots crashed into the cabin above. Darkness. The smell of damp earth. Eva struck a match, illuminating a narrow tunnel shored with rotting timber. They moved fast, hunched low, Mary leading with a candle stub. Behind them, muffled shouts. "They're gone!" Trapdoor after them. The tunnel twisted and descended, opening into a wider space, an abandoned mine shaft, with rusted rails and collapsed beams. A crack of gray light filtered in ahead. They scrambled toward it. A timber beam groaned and gave way. Mary shoved Neshoba forward just as it crashed down where he'd been standing. She twisted, taking the brunt on her shoulder, and stumbled, but kept her feet. Eva grabbed her arm, steadying her, and they burst out into daylight. Gunfire erupted. A bullet grazed Eva's upper left arm, searing through cloth and skin. She bit down on a cry and kept running. Blood soaked her sleeve, warm, sticky, but the wound wasn't deep. They plunged into dense brush along a frozen creek. Behind them, dogs bayed, hunting dogs, voices rising in a chorus that made Eva's skin crawl. Neshoba pointed toward the riverbank, where Mary's donkey waited, tethered to a tree. They reached it, gasping. Eva pulled out the bolts again, both sets now. In full daylight, the evidence was damning. Same filing technique, same nick pattern, same ownership mark. Pike supervised both sabotages. Eva said, her voice tight. "Personal involvement. This proves it." Mary nodded grimly. "But we need to present it publicly, where witnesses can't be intimidated." A shot cracked, splintering bark. The posse had found them. "Go!" Neshoba rasped, his hand closing on Eva's wrist. "River, ice, fast." They ran. The frozen river stretched ahead, surface deceptively smooth. Eva led the donkey onto it, testing each step. The ice groaned, but held. Behind them, the posse reached the bank. Eva glanced back and saw Foster raising his pistol not at her, but at the ice near Neshoba's feet. She opened her mouth to shout, but the shot cracked first. The bullet punched through the ice. The surface fractured like a spider web. Water surged up. Mary, closest to the impact, plunged waist-deep with a scream that cut off as cold shocked the air from her lungs. Neshoba threw himself flat and crawled toward her. His ribs screamed. Eva could see the pain contort his face, and his thigh wound tore open again, blood darkening the white surface. But he didn't stop. He reached Mary and grabbed her wrist, looping his belt around her arm, and pulled. Eva dropped to her knees and grabbed the belt, adding her strength. Together, they hauled Mary out of the water in desperate, synchronized effort. Mary's lips were blue, her body shaking violently. They collapsed on the far bank in a tangle of limbs. Neshoba stripped off his outer shirt despite the cold and wrapped it around Mary. Eva pressed close on the other side, and Neshoba's arm came around both of them, creating a huddle of shared warmth. In that moment, pressed together, sharing breath and body heat, their survival dependent on this fragile human chain, Eva felt something shift in her chest. Not sudden, not dramatic, but profound. The walls she'd built around herself, the independence she'd guarded so fiercely felt. Less like strength and more like isolation. And the man beside her, breathing hard with pain and exhaustion, felt less like a stranger and more like she couldn't name it. Not yet. But she felt it. Dogs bayed from the opposite bank. They had minutes. Eva forced herself to her feet. She grabbed a branch and snapped it, fashioning a makeshift crutch for Neshoba. He took it without argument, leveraging himself upright with obvious effort. Behind them, a guard's lantern fell or was dropped. Fuel ignited setting brush ablaze. Flames leaped up, creating a temporary barrier. Neshoba glanced at Eva, meeting her eyes in the flickering light. Despite the pain, despite everything, something passed between them, a silent vow that needed no words. Eva met his gaze and nodded, her jaw set. They vanished into the pines, leaving nothing behind but footprints the snow would soon erase. Over the next 2 days, Eva, Neshoba, and Mary pushed north toward Pine Bluff, through brutal terrain. They spent one freezing night in an abandoned trapper's lean-to, huddled together for warmth. Eva checked and rechecked Neshoba's wound, which showed early signs of infection, redness, heat swelling. She cleaned it obsessively with their dwindling alcohol supply, knowing that if the infection took hold, all their efforts would be for nothing. During those long, cold hours, they talked halting conversations where Neshoba's English improved and Eva learned scattered Lakota words. Mary filled in gaps, translating when needed. They weren't just planning survival anymore. They were planning justice. "We cannot just show evidence," Mary said on the second night, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Pike owns the marshal. He has influence with territorial officials. If we simply present bolts and testimony, he'll claim forgery, intimidate witnesses, buy silence." Eva nodded, her engineer's mind, working through the problem like a complex mechanism. "We need leverage. Public pressure. Make it impossible for him to hide." "The trestle opening," Mary said slowly. 3 days from now, Pike's grand ceremony. The whole town will be there, miners. He's cheated farmers. He's squeezed families who've suffered. And Judge Whitcomb is coming from Casper for the ribbon cutting. "A stage," Eva murmured, understanding. "A public stage where Pike can't control the narrative." Neshoba, listening carefully, spoke up. "Need, plan, not just show. Make him trap himself." Eva met his eyes across the small fire they'd risked. "Yes, exactly. We need to make him reveal himself." They spent the next hours planning their strategy, taking shape like a blueprint in Eva's mind. By the time they reached Jonas Hale's farm on the morning of the 3rd day, they had a plan risky, dependent on timing and public sentiment, but possible. Jonas listened to their story without interrupting. When Eva finished, his weathered face was hard with controlled fury. "Pike killed my wife." Jonas said, his voice flat but carrying weight. "Maybe not in law's eyes, but in mine. I've wanted justice for 2 years. Tell me what you need." They laid out their plan. Jonas would hide them until the ceremony, then drive them into town in his wagon. They'd present evidence publicly, yes, but first they'd use Pike's own arrogance against him. "He thinks he's untouchable," Eva said. "He'll defend himself, try to discredit us. But if we can get him talking, make him explain the engineering question, his technical knowledge in front of a crowd, he'll slip. Men like Pike always slip when their competence is questioned." Mary added, "And I'll have miners and farmers ready, people Pike has wronged, positioned in the crowd. When the time comes, they'll speak up. Not just us. A chorus." Neshoba, despite his fever and exhaustion, smiled grimly. Trap. Good trap. Pine Bluff woke to celebration. Banners fluttered from storefronts proclaiming progress and prosperity. Bunting draped buildings in red, white, and blue. A brass band tuned instruments near the depot. The whole town had turned out for the trestle opening ceremony. Eva Neshoba and Mary arrived in Jonas's wagon mid-morning, hidden under burlap. Jonas drove them close to the depot, parking near water barrels cover if things turned violent. He had his shotgun hidden under the seat. The crowd was massive, easily 200 people. Pike stood on a wooden platform draped in bunting, resplendent in a new suit, shaking hands with officials. Deke Foster and Marshal Keene flanked him like guard dogs. "Ready?" Mary asked quietly. Eva checked the bolts in her pocket, both sets culvert and sled each marked with Pike's stamp. "Ready." They climbed from the wagon. Eva supported Neshoba, who could barely stand his fever burning through him. Mary clutched her satchel with Foster's tool. They'd taken perhaps 5 steps when a guard spotted them. "They're the fugitives, the ones the marshal's hunting." The crowd murmured, uncertain. Keene's hand dropped to his pistol. Foster grabbed his rifle. Jonas swung his shotgun toward Keene. "You draw that pistol, Marshal, and I blow a hole through you. Let them speak." Keene froze. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Confusion, curiosity, the beginning of anger. Eva seized the moment, but she didn't shout accusations. Not yet. Instead, she raised her voice with the clarity she'd learned presenting designs to skeptical foremen. "Mr. Pike, I have a technical question about your railway construction." Pike's face showed surprise, then irritation. "This is not the time for—" "It's about engineering standards," Eva interrupted, projecting her voice. "Specifically about bolt specifications for load-bearing joints. As someone who employs engineers, surely you can answer a simple technical question." The crowd was listening now, curious. Pike, surrounded by officials and businessmen, couldn't simply refuse without looking evasive. "What question?" he demanded. "The culvert that collapsed." Eva said, pulling out the bolts, both sets. The official report blamed sabotage. "But I'm an engineer, Mr. Pike. I've examined the failed bolts. The threading shows systematic filing, weakening the structural integrity by approximately 40%. That's not explosive damage. That's deliberate pre-weakening." She held up the bolts so the crowd could see. "Can you explain from an engineering standpoint why someone conducting legitimate sabotage would bother filing bolts when explosives would be faster and more effective?" Pike's face reddened. "I'm not an engineer. I employ—" "But you oversee quality control. Yes, you inspect materials," Eva pressed. "Because these bolts bear a very specific mark." She tilted them toward the light. "A stamp. The letter P. I've seen this mark before on tools and materials in your supply depot. It's your ownership mark, isn't it?" The crowd pushed closer, straining to see. Pike's eyes flicked to the bolts, and Eva saw it, a flash of recognition, then panic. "That's circumstantial," Pike blustered. "Any number of bolts could have that mark." "Including these," Eva said, pulling out the second set. "From my wind sled, the one you commissioned, then seized. The sled that crashed because the bolts failed bolts I purchased from your supply depot. Same filing pattern, same ownership mark, same systematic weakening." She turned to address the crowd, directly, not Pike. "Why would someone sabotage my sled to discredit a woman engineer who demanded fair wages and coin instead of worthless script? And why would someone sabotage the railroad culvert? To blame Lakota, people justify their removal and collect insurance payouts." The crowd erupted in shouts, some calling her a liar, but more demanding answers. Miners pushed forward angry faces, recognizing the script scheme she'd mentioned. Farmers who'd been squeezed by Pike's price manipulations added their voices. Mary stepped forward, holding up Foster's surveyor's tool. The filing was done with this tool, Deke Foster's, marked with his initials here. The nick on the file edge matches the pattern on every failed bolt, and the clamp marks on the bolt heads match vices in Pike's personal workshop. I can verify that. Dr. Rowe called from the crowd pushing through. I treated a Lakota child for frostbite after railroad men burned her family's tents on Pike's land. Deliberate burning in winter to force removal. I documented everything and notified authorities. No response was ever received. Judge Whitcomb stepped onto the platform, his face severe. These are serious accusations. Marshal Keene, what evidence do you have for the arrest warrant on this man? He gestured to Neshoba. Keene's face was pale sweat beading despite the cold. He was in the area. His people resisted the railroad. Who else? That's not evidence. Whitcomb cut him off. That's prejudice. I want documentation, investigation records, witness statements. Now. Before Keene could respond, Eva played their final card. She addressed the crowd again. I came to this territory with nothing but tools and skill. I built something innovative, something that could help all of you make your work safer and more efficient. Harlan Pike took my work, cheated me of wages, then tried to destroy me when I objected. He's done the same to how many of you? Me, a miner shouted. 3 months' work paid in script worth half its face value. He foreclosed on my neighbor's farm with a contract full of fine print we couldn't read, a farmer called. My brother died in his mine because he wouldn't pay for proper shoring timber. Another voice. The crowd was turning, anger building like pressure in a boiler. Pike backed away from the platform edge, his composure cracking. That's when Foster made his move. He shoved Mary aside. She fell hard and bolted toward the locomotive, idling near the trestle rifle in hand. No evidence, no trial. Foster shouted, wild-eyed. He grabbed a torch from a worker's brazier and swung it toward the trestle. Jonas dropped his shotgun, grabbed a pitchfork, and sprinted after Foster with surprising speed. He tackled the foreman just as Foster touched the torch to a pitch-soaked beam. They crashed down, rolling. Foster's coat caught fire. He screamed, thrashing. Jonas shoved him into a muddy puddle, smothering the flames, but not before burns seared Foster's hands and arms. On the street, Keene drew his pistol and aimed at Neshoba. Eva grabbed a loose stone from the street's edging and hurled it. It struck Keene's shoulder not hard, but enough to make him turn. His shot went wide, blasting into a water barrel. Neshoba, gathering strength from somewhere deep, swung his war club, striking Keene's wrist. Bones crunched. The pistol clattered away. Neshoba swung again, hitting Keene's knee. The marshal collapsed. But the trestle groaned. Foster's torch had ignited pitch on a support beam, and flames were spreading. The structure shuddered. It's collapsing, someone screamed. Foster burned and, desperate, tried to rise and flee. But Jonas, his own hands burned from fighting. The flames grabbed Foster by the collar and dragged him back. You're going to confess, Jonas snarled. Every damn thing, or I throw you back in the fire. Foster, facing the choice between burning and confessing, broke. It was Keene's plan, but Pike paid for it, paid all of us. I have proof letters, payment records hidden in my bunk. He pointed at Pike with a burned hand. Pike's signature is on everything. He filed those bolts himself, showed me how, said it had to be perfect, couldn't look random. The crowd roared. Pike, standing on the platform, went white. He turned to flee, but townspeople surrounded him, a wall of angry miners, farmers, families whose lives he'd ruined. Mary, back on her feet despite her fall, positioned her donkey, the same stubborn animal that had carried her through the wilderness between Pike and his escape route. The donkey, spooked, or perhaps acting on some instinct, kicked out as Pike tried to push past. Its hoof caught him in the ribs, lifting him off his feet and sending him sprawling into the mud. Judge Whitcomb, standing in the center of the chaos, with the filed bolts in his hands, raised his voice with judicial authority. Harlan, Pike, Royce, Keene, Deke, Foster. You are under arrest for sabotage, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and corruption of public office. Deputies seize them. Everyone else clear back. Armed deputies moved in, separating the crowd from Pike and taking custody of Foster and the unconscious Keene. The crowd backed off reluctantly. They wanted blood, but Whitcomb's authority held them in check. Eva sagged against a water barrel, her entire body shaking. Nashoba, leaning on his club, limped toward her. Their eyes met. Without words, they reached for each other. Eva's hand found his, their fingers threading together. The sun broke through clouds, casting golden light across Pine Bluff. Justice, so long denied, was finally within reach. At daybreak, the circuit judge posted writs at the depot and declared a special term of the territorial court in the town warehouse, impaneling 12 local men as a jury, and swearing a temporary posse to keep order authority vested in him under territorial statute. The warehouse hearing 3 days later was packed beyond capacity. Whitcomb presided, methodical and thorough, calling witness after witness. Mary Kincaid testified about the burned Lakota tents and the frostbitten child. Dr. Rowe corroborated her account with his ledger entries. A locksmith and the blacksmith from Pine Bluff testified that the distinctive nicks and file striations on the bolt threads matched the very file recovered from Deke Foster's kit tool marks, consistent to a certainty, not chance. Eva presented both sets of bolts, culvert, and sled, explaining in clear technical terms how the filing had been done, the matching patterns, and most damning, Pike's ownership mark on both sets. This proves Pike personally sabotaged both my sled to discredit me and the culvert to frame Nashoba and collect insurance. Nashoba, speaking through Samuel, the interpreter, described his arrest, the beating, the manhunt, and his legitimate work mapping routes for the railroad. My people did not destroy the culvert. Pike wanted our land and our removal. A destroyed culvert gave him justification. The guards who transported Nashoba confessed under pressure. Keene had paid them $50 each in silver to stay silent. Jonas testified about Pike's systematic cheating, the script system, price manipulation, the death of his wife due to medicine he couldn't afford at fair prices. Pike killed my wife as surely as if he'd put a gun to her head. Finally, Keene broke completely. His wrist splinted, ribs aching, career over. He had nothing left to lose. Pike approached me 6 months ago. Keene confessed, his voice flat. Said the Lakota were slowing expansion, costing him money. He wanted them removed by any means. I suggested we wait for an actual crime. He said he couldn't afford to wait. There were investors' timelines, politicians to convince. So he proposed sabotaging his own railroad, Whitcomb said. Yes. Insurance would cover repairs, federal government would provide additional funds, and he could blame the Lakota to justify removal. Triple profit. And all it cost was some filed bolts and a convenient scapegoat. Why Nashoba specifically? He was visible, respected, worked with settlers. If we could make him look like a terrorist, it would justify treating all Lakota as threats. Pike specifically wanted someone prominent. The courtroom exploded in angry shouts. Whitcomb hammered for order. When deputies brought in the payment records and letters, Foster had hidden Pike's signature on everything documenting bribes and instructions. The case became airtight. Whitcomb's judgment was swift. Pike's assets are hereby seized to compensate victims. Keene and Foster will face trial in territorial court. I recommend they be held without bail. As for Nashoba, you are cleared of all charges. More than cleared. You are owed an apology. On behalf of the law, you were denied. I apologize. The warehouse erupted in cheers. Outside, as the crowd dispersed, Jonas sat on his wagon with bandaged hands. Mary knelt beside him, checking the burns. You risked everything, Mary said softly. Jonas shrugged. Pike's been stealing from this territory for years. You three gave me courage to fight back. He pulled out a worn pocket knife and handed it to Neshoba. My father's. He always said a good knife and a clear conscience were all a man needed. You earned both. Neshoba accepted the gift, nodding deeply. I carry it with honor. Mary stood her gaze sweeping the valley. I'm starting a new school by the river, for miners' children and Lakota children both. No one should be erased. Jonas nodded. I'll help. Got a mule team I can sell to Widow Brennan, help her through winter, and use the rest to support your school. That evening, Dr. Rowe examined Neshoba's leg. The infection had been caught early enough. With rest and care, he'd heal fully. You're fortunate, Rowe said. And stubborn. Neshoba glanced at Eva, who sat nearby. Learned from her. Eva's cheeks flushed, but she smiled. As they left the clinic, the sun was setting, painting the valley gold and crimson. Neshoba paused on the steps, looking at Eva with an expression that was open and vulnerable. What now? He asked. For you. Eva considered. I rebuild my sled, properly, and offer the design to the Freighters Cooperative. Share the profits. Make something that helps people. She met his eyes. And you? Neshoba's gaze drifted to distant ridges. I train a mapping party. Lakota and settlers together. Honest maps. No more erasures. He turned back to her. But I want to walk slow, through life, with you. Eva's breath caught. I do not walk slow. Then I will learn, Neshoba promised. His hand found hers, and when their fingers threaded together, it felt like a vow. I learn many things from you. This, I can learn too. Eva stepped closer, her free hand resting on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. We walked together. Fast, slow, whatever the path requires. But together. Neshoba's hand covered hers. His other hand rose to cup her face, calloused fingers gentle. For a moment, they stood there, the space between them, charged with everything they'd survived, everything they'd become to each other. Then he leaned down, and she rose on her toes, and their lips met in a kiss that was fierce and tender, a collision of gratitude and desire and deep recognition. When they finally pulled back, both breathing hard, Eva rested her forehead against his. Together, she whispered. Together, Neshoba echoed. 3 weeks later, spring arrived in earnest. Snow retreated up the mountains. The river ran high with melt water. Eva stood in Jonas's barn, examining her rebuilt wind-sled stronger bolts forged from quality steel. A brake ratchet based on Neshoba's suggestions reinforced joints that could handle mountain roads. You think it will work? Jonas asked. I know it will, Eva said confidently. We tested it yesterday. The Freighters Cooperative wants 5 more, maybe 10. You could make real money, set up a workshop. Eva smiled. That is the plan, but not for myself alone. Mary and I want to create an apprenticeship program. Teach mechanics and engineering to anyone interested regardless of background. Jonas grinned. Your father would be proud. Neshoba appeared no longer using a crutch, though his limp remained. He carried a rolled map case. Finished the northern survey. Clean boundaries, all landmarks verified. Judge Whitcomb will file it tomorrow. He unrolled a map on the workbench, precise lines, showing topography, careful notations, symbols denoting sites sacred to the Lakota, alongside settler establishments. It shows both worlds, Neshoba explained. Where they can coexist, where they must respect boundaries. Honest map. It's remarkable, Eva said. This should be the model for all territorial surveys. Whitcomb thinks so, recommended it to the governor. That evening, Ava and Nashoba walked to the ridge above Dead Crow's Hollow. The abandoned camp still rotted below, but it no longer seemed threatening. Just wood and metal returning to earth. They sat on a flat boulder still warm from sun. Eva leaned against Nashoba's shoulder, and his arm came around her naturally. "I have been thinking," Nashoba said quietly, "about what comes after maps are finished, after sled orders are filled. What comes after a home built together for us." He paused. Lakota tradition. Man builds lodge, but woman owns it. Settler tradition. Different. I do not know what our tradition should be. Eva smiled. We make our own tradition. We build together, we own together, equal partners. Where your people far away, my people scattered. Where we belong. Eva looked out over the valley that had nearly killed them, but had also forged them into something new. Here. We belong here. This territory needs people who will fight for justice, who will build honestly, who will bridge worlds. We can do that. Nashoba nodded. Here, between Pine Bluff and the timber, near Mary's school, near Jonas's farm. Close to community, but with space. Room for workshop, room for family, maybe. Someday. Eva turned to look at him. You want that family? With you, yes, Nashoba said simply. Not now, too soon, but someday. When we have home stability, when we can give children safety and hope. His hand cupped her face. You want that? Yes, Eva whispered. Someday. With you. They kissed as the sun dropped below the horizon. When they pulled apart, stars were emerging overhead. We should start planning the house, Eva said. I can design something efficient with good airflow for summer and heat retention for winter. I can ensure it honors the land. Nashoba finished. Positioned for sun near water, and I make sure your workshop has good light. Eva laughed. You have been paying attention. Always, Nashoba said seriously. You saved my life. You fought for me when you could have run. I pay attention to everything about you. Eva's hand found his. You saved my life too. On the ice on the gorge trail. We saved each other. Good partnership. Equal. Balanced. The best kind. Below in the valley, lights glowed in Pine Bluff's windows. Lives they'd helped save were continuing. Jonas tending his farm with hope. Mary teaching children who deserved education. Dr. Rowe treating patients without fear. Miners receiving fair wages. Lakota families rebuilding on land that was finally legally theirs. All because 3 desperate people had refused to surrender to injustice. Eva rested her head on Nashoba's shoulder, and he pressed a kiss to her hair. They sat together as darkness deepened and stars multiplied. 2 survivors who'd found each other in a blizzard and forged something rare and precious, a love built not on romance or convenience, but on trust earned through shared hardship and the absolute certainty that they were stronger together than apart. In the repaired general store at Dead Crow's Hollow, which Jonas had purchased and converted to a way station, a small fire burned in the restored stove. On the wall, Jonas had hung a sign, Refuge freely given. No one turned away. And on the ridge above Eva Sedlachkova and Nashoba sat wrapped in each other's warmth, planning a future they'd earned with blood and determination, while stars wheeled overhead, and the river carried winter's last ice away toward distant seas. Together. Always together.